the future that we want to create in the workplace and performance self-assessment is for AI to really help people who are early in career or even people who are later in career actually have that development mindset. Like, how is this person developing their skills? How am I getting their ideas into this project? Versus like, look what I can do. I can do the whole thing for you is right now the training that it has, right?
One principle that's coming to mind that I would start leaning on would be when you're reaching for an AI tool, ask for help with the process and not the output.
AI is a great coworker. It accelerates and polishes, but the more you use it, are you losing your sense of where you are really with your confidence and your professional development? How do you grow your skills if you don't know where you're at? Coworkers with AI is a podcast about human flourishing and creating the future that we want in our workplaces as we use AI. And today's show is about self-assessment and growing your performance at work. I'm Gretchen LaBelle. I'm joined by Bre'Ana Deen. Good to see you, Bre'Ana.
Good morning. Happy Friday.
Yes. Yes. So we talk about self-assessment in this episode, and I'm just going to kick you off with a question. We recently did some self-assessment on our team, and what is your favorite sort of strengths or personality or self-assessment tool?
I love them in general. They all tend to tell me that I'm an introspective person. And so maybe that's why I love them, because I just love hearing about, learning about myself. But I'll say, we, like you mentioned, our team, you had our team do the Clifton Strengths Finder assessment. And I think I like that one just because I am someone who might naturally focus on all the areas where I can grow. But I do like that angle of these are your strengths. You should really lean into them and maximize them. So I enjoyed that one. And that was my second time doing it. And it was nice to compare how my strengths are evolving too over time. But yeah, I love them all.
I do like the emphasis that Clifton StrengthsFinder has on like investing where your strengths are instead of constantly focusing on your weaknesses. So sounds like it's swinging the pendulum for you over to, okay, reminding you that. And one of mine is, so I was going to put a plug in for DISC because I think a DISC assessment is a great like workplace tool. Like, what are our work styles? How can we work together? But one of my favorites that my career coach actually introduced me to is Enneagram. And it's more of a personality assessment than a strengths assessment, but it also gives you some of the dark underbelly of the dark side of your strengths or your personality and where things can go wrong and some things that you should really focus on growing. So there's a maturity aspect to the assessment. And so I have really appreciated that.
I need to add that one to my list. I haven't done it yet, but now I need to.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like you. I've done them all. I like doing these assessments and thinking about kind of where I am, which kind of segues into our topic for today, which has like two aspects to it. It's like first self-assessment, like how do you know where you are with not only your professional skills, but like with your confidence level, your growth? How do you know you're sort of on a trajectory to maybe be promoted in the workplace? And then the second aspect is, how do you actually grow with AI now sort of buoying your confidence and also polishing everything that you do? Um, how do you grow in the midst of that? How do you continue to stretch and grow yourself? So what interests you about this topic?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking it's a big topic and very relevant, I think, especially because I think a lot of organizations are in this, experiment and really lean into AI phase. So it's like we're having to lean into its use and accelerate. But then, I think these are the questions we should be asking along the way, to make sure we're number one, clear on our skills in the midst of all of that and what, really assessing what we're producing with AI, um, and still continuing to grow through the usage of AI. So I think these are important questions and topics for us to, help us stay grounded
Yeah,
in real growth in the midst of all of this.
absolutely. Yeah, some of the one of the very real self-assessment points in the workplace is when you have to describe your work, whether it's a performance moment or whether you are, doing a report to your manager of what you've been doing. And actually it's really challenging if you're using AI to help you with that, to actually judge whether it's accurately describing your work. And an example that I keep thinking of is like, maybe this past week you attended a meeting with some people and AI is seeing that and saying, "Here's what you did this past week. You led a cross organization, strategic effort, bringing in multiple stakeholders and aligning them." And you're like, I think it might have just attended that meeting. So it can like really accentuate and polish what you've delivered.
I've been desperately trying to use AI for this use case of, weekly recaps of my work, but it's just that's exactly what I run into. It's just pulling random conversations that I was in and I'm like, this is not my manager does not need to know that I checked this email or responded to this person. If and that it just reflects that AI doesn't have the same judgment we do, because I try to get it to think strategically about what actually matters at a higher level, but it doesn't understand that yet.
Yeah. And people who are earlier in career are actually, you know, struggling with that judgment, right? Like
Yeah.
being able to determine, what are the things that are creating value. And um there's the capability now with AI and agents to like automatically reply to your emails and draft a response without really any intervention from you. And so if you are sending out messages that are generated by AI or responding to email generated by AI, um, you know, when is that appropriate and when could that actually get you into trouble in terms of um, not just being able to assess your own capability, but actually growing and developing your capability, right?
Yeah. And I think that applies more broadly too. It's just when thinking about using AI to generate anything for you or complete a task for you, I think if the more expertise you have in that domain, then you might be able to lean more heavily into it, because now it's just assisting you with something you actually could do on your own. But if you're not bringing any expertise or thought to it, up front, then that's where it becomes problematic, because, it's just there might not be anything there, even though it seems like a very polished, output, and I think that's the problem. It's, is that seeing something polished and dense can make us feel like there's something there, but a lot of times you really have to ask yourself, do I actually have a clear point of view or like thesis, or is there anything here in
Right.
all of the words?
Exactly. Exactly. I had an experience recently where and so funny because I brought up early in career, but I feel like even people who are further along in their career, like myself, I also am actually challenged when I use AI a lot. I prepared a presentation for a large group, and it was mostly my ideas and my, my instructions that I put into this, but AI helped me shape and polish it, and I definitely felt that when I was up in front of the room that I I knew this was my content, but the way that it was organized and polished up, I was just kind of grasping to to get at the depth in my mind, just kind of the synapses and the access to information and synthesizing it to be able to present it. I could feel the difficulty of grasping it and presenting it, having leveraged AI to help polish it. Whereas, having presented in front of large groups for a number of years, I recall doing a lot more heavy lifting to get those ideas synthesized and then having more of that confidence going into this situation. Um, so I think that's an example of where AI is it's it's augmenting my capability, and then actually I am in that high stakes situation struggling to actually bring the full knowledge base and the full synthesized ideas because AI has helped me shape them. So,
Yeah.
is
And
that something that you have ever dug into or experienced?
yeah, I mean, I was just thinking that is you just described what learning science tells us about how we learn, right? Like if you haven't put that effort or cognition into something, even if you feel fluent in it, um, people often mistake fluency for learning or true understanding and ability. So it's, one of the things that learning practitioners tend to emphasize is that we can't just, people think that they can read a chapter of a book and read the textbook and read the textbook again, just keep rereading it, and that's studying. But that's just making you fluent in the general topics. Like, the topics, the headlines, but you probably couldn't go and apply that knowledge or do something meaningful with it. And so what's really more impactful is the effort of having to retrieve that information and answer a question about it or generate something new with it, or explain it to someone else. And that's what I think the potential problem is when people just use AI just to get to the answer. Like they're just getting the answers, they're getting this sense of fluency where they feel like they can now um, at least talk about the topic. So it there's evidence behind that.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I hadn't studied learning science like you, but I'm glad to hear that this is actually uh, proven that kind of the level of effort that you put into something is is also the degree to which you are learning it. And you said to me a while back, like things that feel easy. If it feels easy, you're not actually learning. So
Yeah.
one of the things AI does is make things easy.
That was one of the most interesting things to me when I was initially studying learning science is that, when learners feel like they're learning, they're usually not learning. And when you feel like you're struggling and like you hate this class, that's when you're probably taking something away from it. So AI.
I always call it swimming in peanut butter when you feel like you're struggling.
And you know what else came to mind when you were talking about your like prepping for your talk? Just when we were learning English and taking our literature classes, we had to, outline our papers first, right? We had to come up with our thesis and our three main ideas and our conclusion. And that's the part that it seems like now people are more likely to skip that if they have this tool available that can just give them the paper instead of having to do that thought. So I hope, high schoolers are still having to go through that process because I think that's if you can be intentional about it and say, hey, like I've been there recently where I'm like, okay, I jumped to the AI tool too quickly because now I'm just rearranging words and I don't really know what the point is that I'm trying to make. Like there's so much here, but what's the thesis? That we forget to do that work.
That's
Uh, so I think those of us who have experience with that, I think we can pick up on that more easily because we know how to go through the process, but people who don't, people earlier in career or students, they may get sucked into just rearranging the words and
yep,
feeling like the polish reflects something there.
yep. I was actually, so this is really happening, what you're saying. I feel like it's happening for people early in career. It impacts everybody though, where as we use AI, we need to be thinking about how we're attributing our capability to what we're collectively doing with AI. So if you take, you know, human capability and then you say human plus AI, how are we measuring, how are we assessing our own capability in that equation? And is it shifting to being more confident in our abilities or more inaccurate in our knowledge of ourselves and our development because we're starting to attribute what AI is delivering to ourselves? And I was super surprised because I started noticing this in myself, started noticing in the workplace as I started researching this, that there's like tons of research on this and articles. And I was like, okay, this is pretty real. This is pretty happening. I'm going to read a little bit of a snippet for you from an article called LLM Fallacy. It's a misattribution in AI assisted cognitive workflows. And this can apply to technical people doing coding or people in the business workplace who are just using AI for business productivity. But it says a cognitive attribution error in which individuals misinterpret LLM, or I'm going to say, AI assisted outputs as evidence of their own independent confidence. So, producing a systematic divergence between perceived and actual ability. And in the paper, they argue that opacity, fluency, low friction interaction patterns with AI obscures the boundary between human and machine contribution and leads users to infer competence from outputs rather than from the processes that generate them. And what you just described, that's kind of the end of the quote. I'll link this article by Kim Yu and Yi in the notes. But what you just described in this quote of how you used to prepare papers, that is the process you used to go through, right, to get something done. And when we separate that process from the output and no longer are participating in that process to get something done, we are still attributing the output and the total knowledge of that to ourselves rather than seeing it as like, hey, I was um, 10% me and 90% AI. And so actually, that's a frame that I've started to use for myself is actually when I come into a task, like I mentioned, the replying to emails automatically, that's 100% AI, 0% me, right? Maybe I've trained the AI so I can say, hey, 5% me. But, um, what tasks are we approaching at work and how much are we bringing 10%, 50% of our own ideas, our own strategies, 80%, 90%, and how much of the output can we attribute to ourselves? So that is uh, apparently a big topic and a area of research for many people.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting article. And I think one of the phrases that stood out to me was low friction, that
Yeah.
the low friction experience is what creates that false sense of that confidence that you shouldn't have because it was so easy. Um and I think the attribution piece is interesting too. And I know we've kind of teed up a potential future topic related to those workplace norms and etiquette around AI use. But I think that's where that comes into where it's like when how should we think about whether we are transparent about what level of AI use we have with something. I value seeing, like, I think you've experimented with AI in certain ways where you may have automated emails, but they're clearly labeled as sent by the tool on behalf of you. And I think that's a good example of, because that tells me that you did some of the work and connected the tool to some knowledge source that you probably curated and gave it guidance, but I know that it's not you writing back to me. And so that gives me, the context I need, right? So that I'm not assuming um things. So I don't know. I just think that's an interesting topic too. And I know we'll
Yeah.
probably get to a lot more of that with the etiquette piece.
Yeah. There's so much to dig into there. And there's aspects where we are looking at ourselves and making decisions for ourselves, like what we're going to do um to develop ourselves, even though we have AI as a tool to maybe mask some of our um our weaknesses. And so there's that aspect, but then there is this management or leadership or mentorship aspect where um we need to help develop other people, and actually they are facing some headwinds in that AI is maybe masking where they need to be developed, right?
Yeah.
And so I've been seeing social media posts about, like, I'm reading a lot of AI generated documents right now. Like, oh, what used to take like weeks to develop like a proposal or a plan now takes seconds. And so that has like massively increased the amount of documents we're reading, right? And as we're looking through these documents, it's trying to figure out um the person who wrote it, how much of their individual ideas and strategies, or even did they bring them from the team into the document discussions that were had, or how much of the document was really just generated by AI. So there's this development piece of like, how do we develop other people, coach other people, mentor other people, in when to like be
Yeah.
using our own judgment and using our own ideas and putting those in. Uh, I've even I've even told myself, I would like to see the prompt that they used to generate this document. Because I would like to like, what were the inputs into this? How much of this is like AI slop and how much of it is like a real idea that is being brought forward?
Yeah. And I think that's the one of the areas where we have to focus is how do we develop that judgment in people who don't have it, or in ourselves for domains where we don't have the judgment too.
Yeah.
Um, and so I found Scott Hanselman and Mark Rusinovich recently. I think it may have been 3 to 6 months ago now. They published an article um, titled "Redefining the Software Engineering Profession for AI." And the ACM. And it hits on a lot of this. It's specific to the software engineering profession, but I think it's interesting because they talk about how, because AI can now generate a lot for us, and in this case, code, right? AI can write code for software development. Um, that helps the more experienced developers because it accelerates what they already know how to do. Like we said, when you already have that expertise and judgment, it can be valuable because now you're just creating structure and accelerating your own abilities. But for junior developers and early in career talent, they are coming in and they can't it creates more of a bottleneck because now they're creating that more there's more potential for them to create that AI slop that you were just talking about. And bad, poorly written or poorly structured or architected code and software. So they in the article call for I think they call it a preceptorship model. I think borrowing from the nursing domain, and just emphasize the need for more experienced developers to play a role in building that judgment early in career, because you, again, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, you don't get that unless you go through, either go put the effort in and do things manually, or you get that wisdom from people who have already done that. So I think that's interesting too, and I think that applies to other spaces where we need to think about how do we build judgment when we're using AI so heavily. Um, so that I think I thought that was interesting and an interesting solution.
Yeah. And I love how it brings in like the importance of connecting with humans to actually build and develop yourself. You know,
Right.
I just recently did an experiment with where I asked AI like, "Hey, I want to, you know, I think I should get promoted like a couple of levels for myself." And it was like all on board, like, "Yeah, here's what you're doing, like, here's the business case you need to make for this promotion." And it's like it never suggested like you might want to talk to somebody about this, like maybe ask people around you or your manager, skip level manager, like uh maybe assess first. So you can assess whether you are like actually at this place where you can be promoted. And so the article from Scott Hansen when you're talking about is like, yeah, we need humans to like mentor us, to show us, because right now AI is that mirror on the wall that I'm thinking about like the Snow White story that's like, who's the fairest of them all? And AI is like, you are.
Yeah. Now it's just making me feel like we need to petition for for AI tools to be redesigned, because it's weird. It's like that. It's back to that low friction piece. They give you the impression that there's some depth behind, like that they have a brain, right? They give you the impression that they've thought through what they're sharing with you, and I think people, depending on their experience level, are influenced by that impression. But then they're not actually a real person would push back on you or would have an actual point of view. They give you the impression that they're generating a point of view, or generating content based on a point of view, but in reality it's really just echoing what's available, or generating um something that's giving you, it's giving you an output for your response, for your request, without really pushing back or creating that friction that we actually need in a lot of cases. So I think it's on us to create the friction for ourselves. Uh, split, slow our usage down.
Yeah. I think I totally am in line with you. It's like right now, as business professionals, we need to use our own judgment to train AI to help us as humans. Like, I want you to ask me if I have talked to a human about this. I want you to coach me. I don't want you to tell me I'm amazing after every idea that I put in this, conversation. And I think you've even done some of that training yourself of like, here's what I don't.
It doesn't always listen to me.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's one of the big things is I would love for vendors who are building AI to start to really bring in some more of that human centered. Have you talked to somebody about this? Um, so I was go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that too. Yeah, the human, and then also like, what are you actually trying to accomplish, or just making sure you have a point of view, right? Because going back to the jumping straight to the paper, it's like it'll create a 5-page or 10-page paper for you with no clear point or point of view or takeaway. So
Yeah.
sometimes you need to say like, what are we actually? What are we trying? What's the message?
Yeah. Ask me some questions.
Yeah.
Uh, Although I do think it is happening. One of my colleagues was telling me that he was trying to get AI to do some things and it was late at night and AI was like, I think you've done enough for the day.
I'm experiencing that too, actually. Never, and it caught me by surprise. And
Yeah. So maybe there's some building of the models there to be like, okay, I'm gonna watch out for my human. And I think that is like so where we want to go. Like the future that we want to create in the workplace and performance self-assessment is for AI to really help people who are early in career or even people who are later in career actually have that development mindset. Like, how is this person developing their skills? How am I getting their ideas into this project? Versus like, look what I can do. I can do the whole thing for you is right now the training that it has, right? Um, so let's talk about like some practical things that we can do to start really managing our own growth. Like I just mentioned one, which was like I need to train the AI tools that I'm using to like do what I need as human. Um, but what are some things that, we can do to say, you know what, I'm not just going to accept this low friction experience. I'm not going to accept easy because if I do that, I'm people are going to see through it. People are going to start noticing that my real performance doesn't really match my AI generated performance and that my real knowledge and experience doesn't match what I'm able to do on paper. So like for myself and for others around me, my colleagues, my leaders, how do I push myself to keep developing?
Yeah. Based on our conversation, I think one principle that's coming to mind that I would start leaning on would be use when you're reaching for an AI tool, ask for help with the process and not the output, right? Like sometimes we feel inclined to just say, "Help me write this message or write this paper." But what if instead you start with, "Help me." Um, I think there are different ways to approach it. It could be, "Help me come up with the thesis for this paper," or "Help me outline my thoughts for this."
Yes.
And so you're getting it to help you with the earlier stages because, if you ask for an output, you're going to get an output, but then you might not get the process. So
Yeah.
I think that's a good starting point, depending on what you're doing.
That is like absolute gold because it goes back to what I was saying about, hey, I'd like to see the prompt that this person used to generate this paper because it was like, give me this output
Yeah,
potentially instead of let's get a body of knowledge going. Like let's synthesize whether it's my ideas or the ideas of the team, ideas coming from meetings or whatever. Let's synthesize those, distill those down into a body, and then let's take that and make it into um, something that is an output, right?
exactly. Yeah. I think too, you can also decide how where you are on that like early thinking versus closer to the output approach based on just your expertise in something. Like there may be things where you can jump straight to the output if you have the right input already, or you already have the judgment to evaluate the output. But I think it just depends on the situation. So I think the more we can also be more aware of our own competency first going in, I think we can make better decisions about how we approach using AI.
Yeah. I think another one is really looking at different connections and communications that you have in the workplace as how high stakes they are. So, like that automated email generation might be fine if you're just getting something from a business application or a project management database or something, and it's sending back to the person, here's where we're at with this. We're on where this is being built. But to the degree that you're potentially communicating, like with your manager or with your skip level manager or preparing something for leadership or preparing an idea that's going to move the business forward, we need to like take that percentage level of how much is it human generated ideas versus AI generated ideas and outputs from 10% to like up to 80, 90% when it's higher stakes, right? And so that the real you is producing the output, and the real you is able to carry it into a higher stakes situation. So if it's a proposal or an email or something like that, your higher stakes situation is going to be presenting this to leadership. Your higher stakes situation is going to be, you know, getting asked questions about it in a meeting, right? And so all of a sudden you better have the depth, or you better have brought that process into how you developed the proposal or developed the ideas, and then you better have a good grasp on what's written on the page or what's been presented in the deck or put in the deck.
Yeah, the competence has to be there eventually. Even if you think you have it up front, you'll find out eventually with those higher stakes situations. But and I think that it using thinking based on whether how wow, word jumble there, but thinking based on whether it's high stakes or not, but also maybe whether it's just an answer to a question, right? If it's a simple like retrieving information from your context that you already have, like that might be a low stakes thing where AI can confidently say, "Oh, I know the answer to this. I can generate a response for you." But if it's a strategy or a guidance that you need to provide in the email, then that's a different situation because now you really need to bring more of your thinking and your guidance there. So
Yeah.
I agree. What else? I'm trying to think if there are any other practical.
I was
Uh,
going back to your, like, if it's easy, it's not growing you. I was thinking about how can you purposefully create situations or drive yourself into situations where that are higher stakes. Um, and it's a little bit meta, but I have to say that this podcast is that for you and I in some ways of like, okay, I'm accumulating some insights here. I'm seeing some trends. I see some research, but I don't want to just consume that. I want to turn that around into a situation where I'm actually called on the carpet to present this in a kind of a public way, right? And it's creating a high stakes situation for me where I actually have to grow, I actually have to build skills, learn, um, all sorts of things. And it incorporates the process that you just mentioned. Like, I and you are not going to AI and just say, like, "Give me a podcast episode idea." Like, I'm just dumping my ideas, my thoughts, my experiences, my research into and like, ask the AI to more organize it in the arc of the podcast itself. So little insight under the hood there of like how we're generating this, but it is just in and of itself like an example of how to push yourself into development.
100%. Yeah. I remember the first time I learned that kind of gain that insight of how you can really test whether you understand something when I started tutoring in college. Like, I might think I know something well, but if I have to go now explain it to someone else, that's where you really un- figure out if you how well you know it. So I think the more you, like you said, the more you can put yourself in those higher stakes situations where you now have to actually describe what your point of view or, perspective is, that's where you can better assess your competence. Because sometimes when you jump straight to the tools, you have this polished version of something, but it might not be what it might not be anything, or it might not be yours. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. I was remembering a TED talk that you told me about where it was like talking about testing and people who use AI to learn and how that impacted their testing. Could you
Yeah.
share a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think so. There were. I'll have to dig up the link to it so we can include it. But the speaker mentioned two studies. One, they put. I think both were college students, involving college students. So for one, it was like a math learning, math course, I assume, and they put students into three groups, if I'm remembering correctly, where one had access to AI, or maybe it was just two, I can't remember for sure, and another didn't. and they assess them at different points. So when they assess during the practice period and the learning period where that one group had access to AI tools, they performed better on assessments because they had access to AI to generate the answers. And so the speaker described how you might, based on that study, say AI, is it helpful? Oh, I didn't finish. Actually, I jumped to the conclusion too quickly. But then when they assessed them at the end of the course, when they were no longer allowed to use AI tools, they now had to take this actual summative assessment. The students who had access to the AI tools performed worse than those who didn't. And so the speaker described how you might, just from that study alone, assume that AI tools are not helpful for learning and detrimental to the learning process because of that. But then she described this other study where students who had access to half of the participants had access to a live instructor, a human instructor, like a traditional instructor-led course. Others had no access to a human instructor, but had access to this personalized AI tutor that provided kind of just-in-time feedback and all of that. And in that study, the students who had access to the AI tutor performed better than those who had the traditional instructor-led experience with the human. And I think that goes back to what we talked about. Like my takeaway from that, just in thinking about that alongside what we talked about from a learning science perspective, it just really emphasized the same thing we touched on, where in the first situation, the AI was used to just get the answer, right? Or provide that sense of fluency where you're prompting it for information and you feel like you understand, but when it's put to the test, you haven't built that knowledge because you haven't put the effort in.
Yeah.
Where the other group was using it in a more intentional way along with their cognition. It was really driven by them going through the learning process and having access to AI along the way to support the process. And so that's really what stood out to me from that, tying that to that principle of effort and going through the thinking process and not just focusing on the output and the sense of fluency with the topic. So I
Yeah.
thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. I love how that ties to exactly what you were talking about of like when you're using AI to help you actually slow down the process and think deeper and generate the ideas that go into the output. That's when you're actually using AI to help you learn and grow and develop. And when you're just having to build the output for you, that's when that friction free effortlessness is not developing your skills.
Yeah.
So,
And I think it ties back to what we talked about in episode 1, where the question shouldn't be whether we use AI or no AI. It's really just, it's more about how we use it and making sure we're intentional.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I wanna bring that, like, idea of creating more high stakes situations for yourself back to, like, that leading and coaching other people on the team. You're managing people or coaching or mentoring. It's actually looking for opportunities to bring a person into those higher stakes venues to test, their capability and encouraging them to do that, and also looking at sort of not just how ideas are described, but what the actual outcome is of once those ideas are executed, like, are we getting the outcomes or results? So, that is probably a topic for another podcast, is the whole, outcome focus, so
how to assess someone else's or evaluate someone's work when they're using AI. Yeah.
yeah.
I imagine that's what educators are having to figure out right now with students. So
Yep,
it's a big
exactly.
topic, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a an amazing conversation. Uh, we're not discouraging using AI. We're talking about how to use AI in a way that's most helpful for humans and actually keeping the wheel. And you are driving um, your own self-assessment. You are driving your own development in the use of AI. And even if AI is consistently polishing what you do and accelerating what you do, making sure that you are still developing yourself. So I'm going to close us with this sort of reflective question for our audience, which is, how do you know where you still need to grow as you're using AI to deliver your communications and your outputs at work? And we know that careers aren't really built on impressive sounding emails or long documents, but they're built on really becoming that next level professional and accomplishing a job and getting the results. So, how are you going to do that with AI? Is the reflective question. So, thank you, Bre'Ana, for joining me. And until next time, back to work.
See you next time.
Whose loving is mere folly, I guess she